In 1997, Aileen said, "I'm going to tell you the truth of my life and give you this interview."
Hello, and welcome to another marvelous video. Netflix's Aileen, the queen of serial killers, brings back a story we thought we already knew. But there's one twist that still catches everyone off guard. In the middle of Aileen Wuornos' chaos and notoriety appears a calm, church-going woman named Arlene Prawl, a horse breeder from Florida who decides out of nowhere to adopt one of America's most infamous killers. It sounds unreal, almost like fiction, but it really happened. The documentary paints Arlene as both compassionate and mysterious, a woman who believes she was chosen by God to save Aileen's soul. But who was Arlene Prawl really, and what made her take such an unthinkable leap of faith? Let's find out, shall we? Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
Carol Wuornos, be electrocuted until you are dead.
Who is Arlene Prawl? Think of Arlene as the kind of person you might meet at a county fair. She raised horses, kept a quiet life in Florida, and wasn't someone chasing headlines. Before Aileen's name splashed across newspapers, Arlene and her husband Bob ran a horse breeding and boarding operation, known for Tennessee walking horses, and they lived a mostly private life outside Ocala. Her life wasn't all calm country mornings. In interviews from the early 1990s, she said she had struggled deeply with her own demons and found religion after a dark period. That spiritual convention is how a regular horse breeder was drawn into one of America's most notorious criminal cases. Arlene was only about a decade older than Aileen, which makes the whole adoption thing feel even stranger when you first hear it. She and Bob were childless, and they insisted their decision came from faith and compassion. Over time, Arlene became Aileen's public defender in the court of public opinion, arranging visits, fielding interviews, and insisting that the woman behind the headlines was a person hurting for love and family. Critics sniffed at motives and accused the Prawls of courting attention. Arlene always pushed back, saying she simply wanted to be a steady presence for someone the rest of the world had abandoned.
Kills women and children.
How and why she reached out to Aileen Wuornos. A few months after Aileen's arrest, Arlene was flipping through a local newspaper when she stopped on Aileen's face. It was that simple and that strange. The photo and the story hit her in a way that she later described as more than curiosity. She said she felt a spiritual nudge, a clear prompt from God telling her to do something about this woman everyone else had written off. That newspaper moment is the hinge that moves Arlene from a quiet horse breeder to a woman who would claim a prisoner as her daughter. What followed looked almost like a fast friendship written into law. Arlene sent a letter. The letters turned into nightly collect calls, then into weekly visits at the county jail. She showed up with food, prayer, and with the insistence that Aileen was more hurt than wicked. In interviews at the time, Arlene said she talked to Aileen on the telephone at least twice a night and wrote to her every day. That steady presence is why prison staff and reporters began to notice her role in Aileen's life. Pretty quickly, the relationship shifted from visitor to family. In November 1991, Arlene and her husband Bob legally adopted Aileen. On paper, it reads like a headline made for shock value. In person, at least to Arlene, it was a confirmation. She and Bob were childless, and they framed the adoption as an act of Christian mercy, and a way to give Aileen a family where she had none. Newspapers at the time ran the scene like a strange human interest subplot inside a much darker criminal saga. Of course, the media circus around the case made everything murkier. Some reporters and critics were immediately suspicious. They asked if the Prawls were seeking publicity or financial gain. They pointed to the interviews, the access, and the way Arlene sometimes seemed to control who spoke to Aileen. Those questions didn't vanish. They followed Arlene for years and became part of the public story about her motives. At the same time, Arlene was clear about how she saw it. She talked about redemption, about bringing love to someone abandoned, about hearing God's call. For her, the adoption and the visits were not a stunt. They were faith in action, however odd that action looked to everyone else. That mix of quiet devotion and public skepticism sets up the next, more challenging question. Was this faith, love, or something more complicated? Faith, love, or manipulation. Understanding Arlene's true motives. Depending on who you ask, Arlene Prawl was either a saint or someone who wandered a little too close to the spotlight. From the start, she insisted her connection with Aileen Wuornos came from divine guidance. She said God told her to reach out, that it wasn't pity or curiosity, but purpose. In her words, Aileen was not evil, just lost. And Arlene made it her mission to be that one person who wouldn't give up on her. To many who watched their relationship grow, it felt almost biblical. A devout Christian woman offering salvation to a soul that the world had already condemned. But not everyone saw holiness in the picture. Critics, reporters, and even people in Arlene's own community began to wonder, Was this truly about faith, or something more profound, maybe even darker? Some pointed out how quickly Arlene became a public figure after meeting Aileen. She started giving interviews, appearing on talk shows, and speaking on Aileen's behalf. The media loved her story as the motherly woman defending a serial killer, and she leaned into that spotlight, even taking over as Aileen's spokesperson for a while. That's where the line starts to blur. Was she trying to protect Aileen from being misunderstood, or was she protecting her own new identity as the voice of Aileen Wuornos? It's hard to say. Arlene never asked for money, but attention. Intentional or not, it became part of the package. Psychologists who later studied the case suggested that Arlene might have been searching for something missing in her own life. She and her husband had no children, and her faith placed strong value on redemption and purpose. Aileen gave her both a daughter to love and a divine mission to fulfill. For someone so spiritually driven, that must have felt like confirmation that God had chosen her for something extraordinary. Yet, in her effort to save Aileen, Arlene often came across as controlling. She filtered who Aileen could speak to and sometimes claimed to speak for her. Some journalists accused her of manipulating Aileen's image by turning her into a symbol of redemption, rather than facing the darker, more human reality. Still, even in the end, Arlene's faith never wavered. She spoke of Aileen with warmth and sadness, insisting that her soul was saved before her execution. Maybe that's the most haunting part of her story. That a woman who started as a stranger became the only person Aileen ever fully trusted. And we still can't decide whether that bond was a miracle or a mistake.
Electrocuted until you are dead.
It's sad. Society didn't care, did they?
After the execution, where is Arlene Prawl now? When Aileen Wuornos was executed in 2002, Arlene Prawl seemed to vanish with her. The woman who once stood in front of cameras, defending her adopted daughter's soul, quietly slipped out of public view. For years, there were barely any mentions of her name. No interviews, no statements, nothing. It was as if the chapter of her life tied to Aileen had been sealed shut. But Arlene never completely disappeared. She and her husband Bob returned to their quiet life in Ocala, Florida, surrounded by their horses and their church community. Those who knew her say she still lived with the same calm faith that pushed her to reach out to Aileen, though she rarely spoke about the case again. Her few later appearances came in documentaries like Aileen, Life and Death of a Serial Killer, where she defended her choices but looked visibly weary, as if the world had taken too much from her. Today, Arlene is in her 80s. She maintains a modest online presence, posting occasionally about her animals, family, and gratitude to God. There's no mention of Aileen, at least not directly, but between the lines, that story still lingers. The woman who once claimed to see light in a killer's heart seems to have turned that light inward, living out her faith in peace and privacy. Maybe that's Arlene's final act of devotion, not in front of cameras, not in front of courtrooms, but in silence, carrying the weight of a bond that once shocked the world.
And give you this interview.
The real Aileen Wuornos, not a serial.
Marvelous verdict. That brings an end to this video. Arlene Prall's story isn't just about faith meeting evil. It's about what happens when empathy crosses into obsession. Whether you see her as a savior, a seeker, or someone lost in her own spiritual delusion, there's no denying the strangeness of her bond with Aileen Wuornos. Maybe Arlene was searching for redemption just as much as Aileen was. Or maybe she simply believed love could change even the darkest heart. Either way, their story leaves a mark which is uncomfortable, human, and unforgettable. If you found this story as fascinating as we did, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into the most haunting human stories ever told. I'll see you in the next one.